Joining us now, very, very happy to have with us one of the men who's right at the center of this weaponization of government. His name is Reverend Lee. He was a police officer. He served as a peace officer in California. He was a patrol officer, junior officer, corrections officer, a SWAT sergeant, major crimes investigator. He served as a foreign counterintelligence and counterterrorism federal special agent. And then Chaplain Stephen Lee actually went into the clergy. He lost his law enforcement uniform and became officially a man of God. So he spent 40 years first as both. He was a law enforcement officer and then a law enforcement chaplain. Then he became a congregation minister. And he has a long history of going to what are called critical incidents, major critical incidents of national significance, to offer his services as a man of God. This is a term that's used by agencies all across the government and the private sector to identify resources and protocols. And so here's a list of some of the places he's gone. He was at the Colorado, New Mexico, California wildfires, 9/11, Columbine, the Gulf Coast hurricanes, Katrina, Harvey, Irma, etc. He went to where the tornadoes hit in Florida, Missouri, Oklahoma, Illinois, Kirkwood, Alabama, the Oakland PD, the Aurora and Chicago PD shootings, the Haiti earthquake, the Mandalay Bay shooting. So he goes to places where crises are taking shape and tries to offer comfort and wisdom from God. Also joining us is his attorney, David Shestokas. He got his bachelor's degree in political science from Bradley University, his JD from John Marshall. He served as a assistant state attorney in Cook County in Illinois. Currently, he is a Chicago Board of Elections hearing officer and an attorney in private practice. He's worked on a lot of high-profile cases, including cases involving election issues. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. It is so great to have you with us. Reverend Lee, you were now caught up in this tsunami, I guess, in Georgia. You were indicted here along with Donald Trump, along with a number of guests that we've had here on this program. Jeff Clark, former Assistant U.S. Attorney General, Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis, a lot of other Americans. And so you are you're supposedly involved here in this racketeering. Let's start off with just the basics. What does RICO even mean? What are you facing? What are they charging you with?
Well, thanks for having me on, Alex. And I think for those kinds of legal questions, I'll defer to my attorney, Dave, who's been really great to have and a good friend, a dear friend now.
So, Dave, tell us about the legal implications.
Sure, Alex,
what does it mean to be charged with RICO?
Well, what it means is actually a mandatory minimum 5 years in a Georgia state prison upon conviction of a RICO charge. RICO stands for Racketeer Influenced Corrupt Organizations, and that's the act in Georgia that was passed in 1980, and it was originally designed to prosecute things like mob bosses and mafia dons and street gangs, drug cartels. But somehow or other, they've been found a way to use it against, apparently political opponents that they don't like, that are engaged in activities that for some reason or other that don't receive the blessing. At the moment, this RICO charge that's involved were past release charged along with President Trump and 17 other folks. They're saying that this group engaged in a criminal enterprise with the goal of overturning illegally the 2020 presidential election. And it's very, very strange how it's structured together, Alex. They've put together what they call 161 overt acts that are included in what's the criminal enterprise, with that as a goal. And strangely enough, about 159 of those 161 acts are acts that are actually covered by the First Amendment. They're protected. Whether it's a president giving a speech, lawyers giving legal advice, lobbying members of legislatures. In Pastor Lee's case, they actually are accusing him of engaging in this conspiracy by knocking on the two doors and by being on a couple of phone calls. And somehow or other, that has made him a racketeer involved with overturning the election. And while it sounds kind of not like very serious business, because particularly when it comes to Reverend Lee's case, because they've accused him of knocking on two doors and being on two telephone calls. As I said at the outset, the potential penalty for this is 5 years mandatory minimum in the Georgia State Prison, And it doesn't include anything like home confinement or probation or community service or electronic home monitoring. It's actually 5 hard time years is the minimum, and the potential is 20 years at the maximum. So it's very, very serious business. But the people that are cheering this on should understand that whatever they think of President Trump and other kinds of issues surrounding the 2020 election, what's under attack with this indictment are all 5 rights of the First Amendment. You know, the First Amendment has 5 rights. It includes religion and speech and press and assembly and the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. There is, in those 159 of 161 of those acts are people that are engaged in protected First Amendment activity, and yet now they're calling it criminal. It's a very, very dangerous situation for everyone in the country, Alex.
It really is. And, as I'm hearing you talk, Dave, this sounds to me, and I'm not a lawyer, I've never been a prosecutor, but this sounds to me like depriving somebody of their constitutionally protected rights under color of law, which is a serious federal crime. It sounds to me like the attacks on these individuals for exercising their freedom is the crime, not the. Again, I'm not a prosecutor or a lawyer, but this just sounds exactly upside down to me. Reverend, I want to turn to you for a minute. You have a long history of going to areas where there's a major crisis, where things are kind of going crazy. You've been doing it for a long time, for decades. I mean, you went to show up at 9/11. You showed up at all these places. Tell us, why did you do that? Why did you feel called to go to these places where there were crises, conflicts, turmoil? What called you to do that?
Well, in my, I call it my former life in law enforcement, I came to understand the tremendous impact of crises and tragedies and all kinds of things that can happen that are unfortunate or evil. And as a Christian, as a believer, I believe very strongly, and even then, as a believer, I believe very strongly in the answers that God can provide through his son, Jesus, and the forgiveness of sins and hope that we have of eternal life. That's a free gift. And to bring that to bear in a specific way in that context, that's how I got started in, even when I was a cop. Ministering to fellow officers and people on the street that were victims of tragedy or crime. And then eventually went to seminary, felt called by the Lord to go into the ministry to expand that work. It's still helping people. I've always viewed what I've done as helping people fundamentally. But it's a different way, of course, as a pastor now and as a chaplain. But when I went to seminary, I actually engaged in chaplaincy there with Fort Wayne Police Department and wrote my master's thesis on it and really got launched in chaplaincy as a ministry field in addition to my congregational church work. So over the years, I've ministered to thousands of officers. We've done a special Bible edition for law enforcement, wrote a book for officers. I've taught chaplaincy at one of our seminaries to hundreds of people, and worked in lots of different critical incidents, starting the major critical incidents, starting with Columbine, which is 45 minutes away from where we lived at the time. And so I was actually on scene helping to evacuate students and teachers from the inner perimeter. The tactical teams would bring them out on the Pierce Street side. And I'd escort these groups back to Leawood Elementary School to get reunited. And of course, trying to work with them, get them calmed down and remind them that they were now safe. And then 9/11 Ground Zero, I worked the Flight 93 crisis team in San Francisco, went out to Ground Zero later, worked there, worked at the Jacob Javits Center, coordinating chaplaincy coverage for the USAR teams, the Urban Search and Rescue teams. I've worked as an ATF chaplain, as a departmental chaplain for several agencies, and then my own nonprofit organization as well. There's just a lot of different things that I've been involved with over the years.
It's amazing, Reverend. And, as you're speaking, I just a couple of nights ago read through Matthew chapter 5 with my children, and I couldn't help but think of verses 10 through 12. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. I mean, this to me just seems like naked persecution. You are out there trying to serve God and do God's will, and for that you are being persecuted. And so your reward will be great in heaven. You know it, and I know it. But Dave, I want to go back to you. What does this mean for other Americans? I mean, are we now entering a time where doing what God calls us to do, preaching the good news, going out and speaking truth, could land us in jail?
That's the danger of this prosecution in this case, Alex, is certainly that, as I say, all the First Amendment rights are in danger, not just religion. Of course, Pastor Lee was engaged in some, I would say, pastoral activities, and somehow or other they've chosen to find these things to be criminal and illegal. I do want to call attention to something I think that people should know about this activity in Georgia. Back in November of 2020, there was a special purpose grand jury that sent a subpoena to Reverend Lee here in Illinois, and seeking to compel his testimony before the grand jury. And if for folks to know this, they should know that the authority of a state court to compel somebody's testimony ends at the borders of the state, unless they have the cooperation of a judicial officer in the residence of the person whose testimony they seek. And so they sent this to Kendall County, Illinois. We had a series of hearings in Kendall County, and in November, actually specifically November 9th, 2020, a judge in Kendall County said, Fulton County has not even provided enough evidence for Reverend Lee to be considered a material witness in this case. And he refused their request to compel his testimony. And subsequently, he offered them 30 days to offer any more evidence. They never offered any more evidence. They never sought me out because I was now his counsel of record. They never sought anything further from Kendall County. And then we woke up August 15th and found out that he'd been indicted in this case, where a judge, the only judge to hear something about this outside of Georgia, had determined that they didn't even have enough evidence for him to be a witness. And we woke up to find out that he was a defendant. And so that, I think that gives people some idea of what's going on in Georgia. Then in terms of the slipshod nature of the investigation, and they were just looking to charge as wide a net as they could possibly charge, that they could possibly come up with. And it's very, very dangerous. But it's not just the religion situation that you talked about. It's speech of all kinds. It's lobbying the government and trying to see to it that the elections are good. We're built upon what they call the consent of the governed, and if we don't have confidence in the elections, and confidence in the elections includes the ability to contest an election. An election's not actually over until all the litigation is complete. And so to say that the day that the election authority announces a certification that's done and said, and you're supposed to sit down and shut up, that is a very, very dangerous situation for the country generally. And so there's a lot of things at stake in Georgia.
Yeah, there really are. And we actually interviewed recently Senator Colton Moore, who's demanding an emergency special session to investigate this prosecutor, to defund this prosecutor. Of course, our good friends at the Illinois Family Institute are now raising money for your defense. Folks can donate to that over at GiveSendGo. It's givesendgo.com/Chaplain Lee. It's givesendgo.com/Chaplain Lee. It's just so abominable.
Reverend, I might mention, while they call that a defense fund, we had, of course, we have to be in court when the judge and the prosecutors say we have to be. We flew down there for one day. The airfare to go to Georgia for Reverend Lee and me, just one day, $1,200. This is going to be an extraordinarily expensive undertaking for a man that has lived a life of service and is really doesn't even own his home, which is not unusual for somebody in his line of work. I just want to mention that while they call it a legal defense fund, there are tremendous amounts of expenses associated with this.
Yep. And of course, even if everything goes away, right? They say the process is the punishment. This is such a grueling process, folks. And make no mistake, if they're coming after Reverend Lee, they can come after you and they will come after you. This is an atrocity being perpetrated. So, folks, if you want to contribute, givesendgo.com/Chaplain Lee. He's going to have a lot of expenses. Before we go, Reverend, how can people pray for you? I can't even imagine what you're going through right now. What can the folks out there do? I mean, of course, if you live in Georgia, call up your legislators, let them know that you support Senator Colton Moore and his efforts to call an investigation here. If you can contribute financially, please do that. But Reverend, how else can people support you? How can people pray for you?
Well, I appreciate the question, and it's a good opportunity also to thank my team, including Dave and others who have come alongside to help. And of course, as a Christian, I believe, and I share this belief with others, that we trust the Lord. We don't trust circumstances. And I'm prepared for whatever comes. I think this is an opportunity to stand on truth and our freedoms, and to also defend our ability to help people according to our religious convictions, according to our First Amendment rights. And so anything people can do to either financially support, because the legal costs are extremely high, but really to pray, and to pray for our country, pray for folks like myself. I really appreciate that very, very much. But I have confidence in the Lord, and I'm prepared for whatever comes. And I have a very supportive family, very supportive church that I serve, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Lee, Dave. We appreciate you both so much. We will keep you in prayer. We'll pray that God will be glorified through this entire thing, and that justice would ultimately be served. Thank you both, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. Folks, again, if you want to help them out financially to deal with this, the government's got all the tax money in the world. Get over to givesendgo.com/Chaplain Lee, and do keep them in prayer, folks. The family, the everybody involved. This is just horrific. Of course, we know Donald Trump and so many other great Americans have also been caught up in this nightmare. So, folks, we've got a big problem on our hands. Stay with us. We're going to be right back with Brandon Howes, an absolutely extraordinary individual. I'm sure you've seen him all over the place. Stay with us. We're going to break down the news of the day with Brandon Howes.